2:11 a.m., just east of Taiwan's coastline. On a darkened operations screen, warning zones light up one by one. Live fire areas declared without apology. Minutes later, a missile booster flares briefly over the horizon before vanishing into the night. This isn't a routine drill. This is live ammunition, real trajectories, real consequences. Inside a control room hundreds of kilometers away, officers don't cheer. They lean closer to their screens. Every radar pulse, every timing interval, every coordination gap is being quietly logged. China is sending a message of strength, but in doing so, it may be revealing far more than intended. If deterrence is about fear, why does this moment feel like an intelligence windfall for the other side? And what happens when a show of force turns into a strategic mistake? The Taiwan Strait has always been narrow in distance but vast in consequence. At its tightest point, it spans barely 130 kilometers, close enough for modern missiles to cross in minutes, yet wide enough to demand complex coordination between air, naval, and missile forces. For decades, this strip of water has functioned as one of the world's most sensitive geopolitical fault lines, where deterrence depends less on declarations and more on posture, timing, and restraint. China's military doctrine views the strait through a clear strategic lens. Any future conflict scenario involving Taiwan would hinge on speed paralysis and control of escalation. Live fire drills are designed to signal exactly that readiness to impose costs quickly and decisively. By launching real munitions and declaring exclusion zones, Beijing demonstrates not just intent but confidence in its command and control architecture and joint force integration. Yet this confidence exists alongside a persistent dilemma. Deterrence requires visibility, but visibility carries risk. Every system activated during a live fire exercise, every handoff between radar command node and firing unit creates a pattern, and patterns once observed can be studied. From Taiwan's perspective, these drills are not isolated events. They are part of an accelerating cycle that began intensifying in the early 2020s, larger formations, shorter warning times, and increasing realism. The goal is psychological pressure, forcing Taiwan's defense establishment to remain on constant alert, straining personnel and resources. But pressure cuts both ways. Constant alert also sharpens institutional reflexes. Regionally, the implications extend beyond the island itself. Japan watches the northern approaches with unease, mindful that missile splash zones and air corridors increasingly brush uncomfortably close to its southwestern islands. The United States, while careful not to escalate rhetorically, treats each drill as a data point, another opportunity to assess how a peer military operates under near operational conditions. This is the strategic paradox at the heart of the exercise. To deter, China must show capability. To show capability, it must operate systems in the open. And once those systems are operating, they are no longer just instruments of power, they become sources of information. So the question shifts. In attempting to demonstrate control over escalation, did Beijing inadvertently invite a deeper understanding of how it would fight if escalation ever slipped out of control? Long before the first live round left its launcher, the real contest had already begun, and it was almost completely silent. From China's side, preparation followed a tightly controlled sequence. Maritime exclusion zones were issued. Airspace advisories followed. Missile units moved into pre-surveyed positions, their timelines synchronized down to the minute. Radar systems were brought online in layers, early warning first, then fire control, each activation deliberate, each one logged. In doctrine, this phase is about discipline, proving that command and control can function smoothly under operational stress. But every system switched on also emits something harder to hide behavior. Across the strait, Taiwanese defense centers shifted into heightened readiness. This was not panic. It was routine practice countless times. Operators tracked radar emissions, measured intervals between sensor activations, and watched how quickly command decisions propagated through the network. These were not guesses, they were timestamps. Above the region, intelligence platforms, some visible, some not, quietly filled in the picture. Satellites captured launch preparations and postures. Signals intelligence units listened for changes in communication patterns. The objective was not to stop the drill, it was to understand it. A junior radar technician on a night shift might not see the strategic picture, but he feels it. Coffee cups go untouched. Conversations stop mid-sentence when a new signal appears. A supervisor quietly notes that a radar stayed active 3 seconds longer than last time. 3 seconds can mean hesitation or redundancy. Both matter. This is the hidden cost of realism. A live-fire exercise compresses decision-making into real-time, and real-time reveals habits, how fast commanders authorize actions, how systems recover from simulated disruption, whether units default to centralized control or local initiative when pressure rises. In military analysis, this phase is often more valuable than the launch itself. Missiles land and explode. Data, however, accumulates. By the time the exercise reached its most visible stage, both sides already knew more than they had before it began. One side intended to demonstrate readiness, the other was quietly mapping the anatomy of that readiness. And once that map exists, it doesn't disappear when the exercise ends. At 0540 local time, the exercise moved from preparation to action. Naval units adjusted course to establish the firing box. Airspace controllers cleared corridors with clipped, precise instructions. Onshore missile crews completed final checks, their timelines now locked. This was the moment designed for headlines, the visible proof of capability. From the PLA command perspective, the drill was about orchestration. Multiple domains had to move in sequence: maritime exclusion, first air patrols overhead, then missile activity synchronized to simulate a broader operational scenario. No single launch mattered as much as the rhythm. Smooth execution was the message. The first live round ignited with a brief flash, the booster's glow reflecting off low cloud cover before disappearing downrange. Seconds later, another system came online, its radar sweep distinct, its frequency shift measurable. To the public, it looked like power. To trained observers, it looked like structure. Inside Taiwanese monitoring centers, the tempo changed immediately. Screens filled with overlapping tracks, aircraft on the periphery, surface vessels holding station missile telemetry arcs traced in real time. Analysts weren't asking where the missiles would land. That had already been declared. They were asking how the sequence unfolded. The timing between radar activation and launch authorization. The overlap between air patrols and missile windows. The duration systems stayed exposed before shutting down. These details mattered more than the explosions. As the drill continued, air activity intensified. Fighters operated near the edges of the declared zones, maintaining distance, but testing response times. Each movement triggered a reaction, sometimes immediate, sometimes delayed. Those delays were logged. A senior officer watching the feed noted something subtle: the coordination between different firing units wasn't identical. One battery completed its cycle faster than another. That difference suggested variations in crew training or command delegation. Small discrepancies like this don't decide a war, but they shape planning assumptions. From the PLA's point of view, the exercise remained under control. No unexpected incursions, no public missteps. Missiles flew, targets were simulated, and the operation concluded without incident. On paper, it was a success. But drills don't exist in a vacuum. Across the region, additional eyes were watching. Maritime patrol aircraft remained just outside engagement envelopes. Sensors recorded how quickly Chinese units reacted to nearby activity and how often command nodes intervened. Each reaction added another layer to an emerging profile. This is where the narrative shifts. A live-fire drill compresses stress decision-making and coordination into a narrow time window. Under that pressure, militaries reveal how they actually function, not how doctrine says they should. What looks like deterrence on the surface can double as a diagnostic scan for anyone paying close attention. As the final launches concluded and exclusion zones were lifted, the visible phase of the exercise ended. Missiles had flown, headlines were written. But in multiple analysis rooms across the region, the real work was just beginning, replaying timelines, comparing patterns, and updating models. China had demonstrated strength, but it had also demonstrated process. And in modern warfare, process can be just as exploitable as hardware. The most important reactions did not involve missiles. As the live-fire phase unfolded, Taiwan's response followed a carefully calibrated script, firm enough to signal readiness, restrained enough to avoid escalation. Fighters were scrambled in pairs, not to challenge the exercise zones directly, but to occupy key airspace corridors. Ground-based air defense units shifted to higher alert states, their radars rotating through predefined modes designed for observation rather than engagement. This was not about stopping the drill, it was about measuring it. Each scramble tested response time, each radar mode change checked how Chinese systems reacted, whether they tracked, ignored, or adjusted. When Chinese aircraft altered altitude or spacing, Taiwanese operators noted the delay between detection and response. Seconds were logged. Patterns emerged. Further north, regional partners quietly raised readiness levels. Maritime patrol aircraft extended their orbits. Intelligence sharing channels warmed up. Nothing was announced publicly, but coordination tightened. In modern deterrence, silence often carries more weight than statements. From a defensive standpoint, the objective was simple: remain predictable enough to avoid accidents, unpredictable enough to deny the other side's certainty. By staying just inside legal and operational boundaries, Taiwan reduced the risk of miscalculation while still forcing the PLA to react. And reaction again meant exposure. Every adjustment made by Chinese units, course corrections, radar retasking, command acknowledgements, added resolution to the growing intelligence picture. The defensive side wasn't burning fuel or ammunition unnecessarily, it was burning uncertainty. By the time the drill concluded, Taiwan and its partners had not won anything in a visible sense. No territory changed hands, no aircraft crossed red lines. But they had confirmed something critical: how fast China reacts when challenged indirectly, how disciplined its units remain under observation, and where flexibility ends and rigidity begins. Those insights don't fade when the exclusion zones are lifted. They get archived, briefed, and folded into future planning. And that is where the cost of the drill truly begins to add up. The mistake was not tactical, it was architectural. By choosing realism over ambiguity, China's live-fire drills exposed the skeleton of its operational system. Modern militaries are no longer judged only by the range of their missiles or the number of their aircraft, but by how information flows between sensors, commanders, and shooters. In this drill, that flow became visible. The first layer of exposure lay in sensor footprint. When radars transition from standby to fire control modes, they reveal coverage, geometry, refresh rates, and prioritization logic. Observers don't need to penetrate the system, only to watch how it behaves. Over time, repeated drills reduce uncertainty about where coverage is strongest, where it thins, and how quickly it can be reoriented. The second layer was command and control latency. Live fire requires authorization chains to operate in real time. Analysts measured the intervals between detection, decision, and execution. Those intervals form a baseline. In a real crisis, deviations from that baseline can signal stress, overload, or disruption. What was intended as a show of decisiveness became a reference point. Third was inter-service coordination. Missile units, air patrols, and naval elements did not move as a single organism. Minor variations appeared. Some units completed cycles faster, others lingered. These discrepancies hint at where authority is centralized and where local initiative is limited. In high-intensity conflict, rigidity can be as dangerous as weakness. Finally, there is cost asymmetry. Live missiles are expensive. The intelligence harvested from observing them, patterns, timings, habits, cost comparatively little. One side spent resources to demonstrate power, the other gained insights that will shape future contingency planning. None of this implies failure. The drill was executed safely and professionally. But deterrence depends on controlled opacity. When too much is revealed, strength becomes predictable, and predictability is exploitable. In trying to signal readiness and control, Beijing may have unintentionally reduced the uncertainty that protects it. That is the paradox at the heart of the exercise. The missiles landed where intended, but the data landed everywhere else. The immediate aftermath of the drills was deceptively quiet. Shipping lanes reopened, airspace restrictions were lifted, official statements emphasized stability and routine. But beneath that calm surface, the strategic environment had subtly shifted. In the short term, the exercise accelerated readiness across the region. Taiwan adjusted alert cycles and refined response protocols based on what it had observed. Japan quietly increased attention to its southwestern approaches, where missile trajectories and air activity had brushed uncomfortably close to sensitive areas. The United States, while avoiding public escalation, folded new data into its contingency models for the Indo-Pacific. None of these responses were dramatic, but together they raised the baseline level of preparedness. And a higher baseline means less room for error. Over the medium term, the drills contributed to a feedback loop. Each large-scale exercise now invites more intensive monitoring. Each monitoring effort pushes planners to design even more complex demonstrations to avoid predictability. Complexity, however, increases the risk of miscalculation. The ladder of escalation grows steeper with every rung added. Longer-term consequences are harder to quantify but potentially more serious. As patterns become clearer, assumptions harden. Commanders begin to plan not for uncertainty but for expected behavior. In a crisis, acting against those expectations intentionally or not can trigger rapid escalation. This is the paradox deterrence faces in the Taiwan Strait. Exercises meant to prevent war can over time normalize the conditions of war. The line between signaling and rehearsing becomes thin. For regional security, the drills did not change borders or alliances. What they changed was perception. How quickly forces can react, how disciplined they remain under observation, and how much they are willing to reveal to prove a point. And once perceptions shift, they rarely reset. What unfolded near Taiwan was not a rehearsal for immediate conflict, nor was it an accident waiting to happen. It was a calculated demonstration of strength. But strength, when displayed too clearly, can become a liability. China's live-fire drills succeeded in their narrow objectives. Missiles launched as planned. Forces coordinated across domains. No red lines were crossed. On the surface, deterrence held. Yet beneath that surface, something more enduring took place. A system designed to project uncertainty instead revealed its structure, its rhythms, its habits, and its constraints. In modern warfare, the decisive factor is often not firepower, but information. The side that understands how an opponent thinks, reacts, and coordinates gains options long before a shot is fired. By compressing real-world decision-making into a public exercise, Beijing allowed observers to study its operational DNA. This does not mean conflict is inevitable. In fact, it underscores the opposite. The more transparent a crisis becomes, the more both sides recognize the catastrophic costs of miscalculation. But it also means that future encounters will unfold with fewer unknowns, and fewer unknowns reduce the margin for restraint. For Taiwan and its partners, the lesson is sobering. But valuable preparedness is not just about weapons, but about interpretation. For China, the challenge ahead is balancing deterrence with discretion, showing enough to be taken seriously without showing so much that advantage slips away. In the end, the biggest mistake was not the firing of missiles. It was the assumption that demonstrating power carries no strategic price. The missiles fell into the sea. The consequences, however, will echo far longer. Bye for now.